Don't judge me.
It's a bit too late. All right, okay.
You know when you clap and it's like off center, like when you're trying to hit mozzies and it's like, Sometimes I do that. Okay,
I
John
am
Lennon.
surrounded by weirdos.
Chris over there, John Lennon for the day with his little John Lennon glasses. Speaking of John Lennon,
Who that?
who's that? Music in history of music, musical history. I don't know.
Music in history.
Music in history. Right, first time.
Yeah.
What's that, Mr. Production Manager? Historical music.
Well, the role of music in various historical periods, events, context, yes.
I mean, John
yes.
Lennon, for example, a massive movement in the 60s, the anti-war movement, singing about peace and all that stuff. Music has a it's like a bookmark in certain periods of history where you can see styles and genres that pop up.
So my grade 8s and I, going over the mineral revolution, gold mining in particular, Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Johannesburg. Joanna, give me hope.
Joanna, give me hope.
Yeah, I played them the Hugh Masekela song, Stimela.
Okay. Stimela.
Yeah, there's a train that comes from Malawi, Mozambique. There's a train that comes from Zululand, and he mentions all these different
bringing with it migrant laborers.
Yeah. Men. It's a very poetic song. The intro. It documents, how men would have left their families behind, their livestock, to move to Johannesburg to earn a bit of money and to pay the hut tax, pay lobola, and all of that. And so this song would have been composed in the 70s. So it doesn't speak directly to the 1880s,
the gold mines,
with the beginning of
but it's before that.
But it documents a portion of a very important period in our history. And it's such a beautiful narration, and he captures the imagery through the steam train, and he screams, woo, woo!
I remember that song.
Yeah, and it's just a striking image that he paints through the music, and the trumpet sort of captures the sorrow of these men, just turning their backs on their land, on their family, as they journey down to Johannesburg. And I think that's the power of music. It's unlike a journal article or a book. I think it also documents the emotion behind the lived experience. And man,
that's what we're about in history. Humanities, it's about how people are affected by things. And so you're right. Music is an emotive display, a record of those feelings. I like that. I mean all the way through history. As I said, the Vietnam era, the 60s is a huge point in music. John Lennon and and everyone else. Now that I'm thinking of it, I'm blanking on names, but yeah, I mean it's that kind of movement. I mean, if we looked, we spoke about. Did we speak about? No, we haven't spoken about, but the Black Power movement. But we spoke about Black consciousness and that similar kind of movement in the United States, and Stokely Carmichael marrying someone with whom he obviously resonated in Miriam Makeba. Someone singing about freedom in South Africa and that sort of thing, and obviously those are quite related. Reason I brought this up is because you're quite the musician, Mr. Ngobo.
I was hoping you're not going to mention that.
Of course, we're going to mention that. I think it's important that people understand that you're not just a historian; you're a passionate musician. Very talented by that way.
Thank you. I think music, in a sense, did lead me to a history. I think teaching history for me is a culmination of different things. I come from a very a deep jazz background. My father always collected jazz records.
Kind of like that one on behind your head. Was Ellington something you listened to growing up?
Yeah. Ellington, Coltrane, Miles Davis.
It's interesting. I'm going to interject there because that's the same music I grew up with. Which is very interesting.
We ended up teaching history.
Yeah. My father, also a jazz musician, aside from his career. But
because I mean, if you look at the likes of your Masigelas and your Miriam Makebas, those were activists. But when you look at other groups like the Beatles, and even more recent bands, a lot of them may not necessarily be activists, but they do document the period.
Yeah, exactly.
You get to see how people dressed, you get to see how people spoke, the language of that particular time, and
the thoughts and feelings of that particular time.
Exactly. We often sort of scold this generation for being fragile and say, if it was the 70s and somebody said this to you, you just shrug it off and move on. Yeah. And like the music that was composed back then is raw. I don't want to say pure, but it's raw. It captures the essence of that time. And
how so? Why do you say that?
Because you compose music within the context in which you live in, right? And you see a lot of that boldness from the 80s, 70s, where life was simpler, where there weren't too many mediums of exposure really to diversity. You knew what was in front of you. We didn't have your YouTubes and your TikToks and whatnot, so you were primarily exposed to what was right in front of you at the time, and that's what you documented. I can't imagine not being an American and writing a hip-hop song as if I was an American. I can rap from a South African context. I can play music from a South African context because that's what I've lived, right?
It's experience. It's authentic experience. It's
exactly hence the authenticity,
the rawness. Okay, I'm with you.
The rawness. So man, and I think that's fascinating that music documents narrative as it unfolds, because we often say in a class when we teach history, don't process this event from where you are today. Process it from that particular time.
Empathy.
Exactly. We didn't have social media back then, so you wouldn't have been as exposed to alternative media, even what do we call it? Podcasts. It's not like people were conversing live online and breaking different views and perspectives apart. There was none of that, and so you have to think within that particular context. And so I think music is a documentation of that, the limitations, the environment itself. I mean, when you listen to songs like "Oh Mam Yvonne Chaka Chaka," "We Miss You Manelo," "Where Are You?" She doesn't sing "We Miss You Mandela." That was illegal.
Okay, right.
Then. Yeah, she would have. There was the apartheid government had restricted that, and so just even that, how people found loopholes around the system to effectively communicate the sentiment of the time. Because remember, no podcasts, no social media, no alternative media, no algorithms to censor you. Well, there was censorship in radio. But just that, how people were creative about communicating their sentiments at that particular time.
You started singing it just now. Give me hope, Joanna. I mean, it's quite cryptic, isn't it? Give me hope, Johannesburg. Let's change. That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Yeah. So I want to know why you're quite the accomplished drummer. Why drums? Why did that catch your interest? Obviously, as a young person.
I think I've always leaned more towards piano.
Okay.
Piano was the first instrument that we had at home, a toy piano. I don't know, drums.
It seems to be your passion. You do a lot of drumming, and
I think it's expression. Remember in our previous episode discussing TRC. Discussing TRC. I raised the point that therapy in South Africa is expensive, man.
Yeah.
You know, and so I do find that sometimes music becomes an outlet, and certain instruments best reflect, you know, that medium of expressing a certain emotion. I think drums do that. They also speak to spirituality in a sense. I'm not into African spirituality or anything like that. I'm Christian in terms of religion, but there is that, you know, there is that deeper connection that I tend to experience on drums whenever playing, you know, to culture, to identity, to lived experiences.
So do you think, like, I would say historically, I would argue that almost every culture has had some form of drumming.
Yeah, but African music in particular, and African music being grounded in African experiences, African reality, African environments, I think the drum tempo really is at the center of African music. You can get rid of keys, trumpets, but drums, you know, that pulse, that sense of motion and movement, and sometimes rage. I think drums for me really capture that.
Each emotion in its own rhythm.
Yeah, and you can go. You can be tender and mellow with it. You can also rage on the kit. Saxophone players do that a lot. There's about this guy from Nigeria, Fela Kuti.
Okay.
Fela Kuti, jazz saxophonist. Hey, English. Yeah.
Sorry, I was struggling with the word trajectory just now. Trajectory.
Yeah, Ufela would have been an activist in a similar sense as Uhuma Sigela here in South Africa.
Okay.
So
he's an activist in Nigeria.
Yeah.
What is
way back then? So he would have criticized. Oh, we're back.
We're back. Sorry, we had a technical issue.
Technical boo-boo.
Okay, bring us back to Fela. Sorry,
Yeah,
I apologize, Fela, if you ever watch this.
Now Fela is long gone. He's now with us. Yeah, so Fela wrote a song titled Zombie. And essentially in the song he critiques Nigerian soldiers who followed very brutal instructions from the dictator of the time in Nigeria.
What period are we talking?
So I'd say 50s, 60s.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that period. So post-liberation Nigeria. So black government and oppressive regimes. And his remarks were essentially about the fact that you can have people who claim to be serving the public, because you're in the military, but clearly in a very oppressive manner, and this was all to aid the interests of dictatorship and just inhumane practices within Nigeria. And so you can imagine how risky, how dangerous that would have been. You know, to have songs out there such as Zombie. You know, lyrics like, when I say walk, you just walk.
Yeah.
When I say shoot, you just shoot. Well, I'm paraphrasing.
But hence the zombie image.
Exactly. You just follow instructions without using discretion and figuring out, is this humane? Is this the right thing to do? And music does trigger that as well. You know, we get to ask those hard, difficult questions, and it's a bit more pleasant to ask those questions. I don't know if pleasant is the right word, because it's sheltered around art. You know, so it feels a bit more. I mean,
I suppose poetry and actual painting art is also a kind of a form of protest. So music. I mean, drumming, as I said, is seems apparent in every culture. I mean, look at war. War always had drummers, little drummer boys, you know, quite literally, who would as they marched, whatever the beat was, signaling various even kind of movements of the army in terms of the drums. But yeah, it does seem to be used as a spiritual outlet in many cultures.
Maybe also as a unifying factor, because in war, for example, with that marching drum, it is very hard to march out of step or out of tempo if you are listening to that tempo, right? And if we are all marching to that one tempo, then we march in unison, right? And I often go for long walks with my headphones plugged in, and if I'm listening to something that is a bit upbeat, like I'm a piano,
you have a skip in your step.
It's hard not to, and I don't know if it's because I dabble in music. I think
you more than dabble, but all right, you are modest.
It's very hard not to walk in beat, you know, and sometimes, even when you're playing and somebody wants to have a conversation with you, as you're playing, you sort of respond to them rhythmically or melodically. It's almost like you're singing to them. And I think when we listen or participate in music and other art forms, jointly, I think we do find ourselves in that common space. And so I think music does create that unifying environment, that solidarity behind it. Yeah.
I mean, that makes me think of Shorsha Loza during the 95 World Cup, that sort of thing, which brought people across all races together, because of its rhythm, not so much because of its lyrics, because I think that's lost on a lot of people. But definitely the rhythm, the whole beat of the whole thing is.
Look at Toy Toys strikes. I'm not doing. A lot of the people are just there for the hey. You may not even know what exactly
what are you
we are striking for. Or even if you do know, but how deeply invested are you into that particular cause? But a lot of people get roped in by the rhythm, by the singing, by the chanting, and it's just the 2Ks, as our producer would call it, a vibe. You are pulled in by the vibe.
It's interesting. What you mentioned, I'm a piano. What is that?
I'm a piano.
Sorry, I'm a generation older than you.
So amapiano is a subgenre of house music.
What is okay. Yeah, sorry, it's a subgenre.
So it's a subgenre of house music essentially.
Okay.
But it's more recent. It's more recent. So it's dance music.
I have to ask the obvious. Does it involve the piano?
It does, but the piano is not at the center of it. I would say, but yeah, I'm a piano in terms of the origin of the sound. Yes, it was crafted around.
Does it
piano melodies?
Does it reflect modern culture?
It is based on modern culture. I think the genre actually came about as a documentation of modern culture, how people move. How people live, how people dress, how people speak, and all of that. And even in terms of lyrics, how these songs are composed. And naturally it will evolve, because I think now we can say there are subgenres under amapiano as well. Okay. Yeah, so there's amapiano that we call a private school amapiano.
I'm a piano.
Yeah.
Is that the English version?
I'm a piano. So that's contemporary. That's current music.
Do you think that musical instruments, which have obviously evolved dramatically from even go back thousands of years, but let's look more in sort of 20th century, acoustic guitars, and then the electrical guitar, and piano, and then the electric piano, and so electronic music now has become sort of digital music. Does that affect the effect of music, do you think, as a musician?
I think it certainly does. There are musicians who insist on acoustic instruments, particularly. You know, they want to feel the weight of those keys on a grand piano.
Yeah.
I insist on acoustic drums. I want to hear the room when I play, and if I have to tune that snare slightly higher so it gives me that crack and that high pitched sound that we all love from a snare drum, I want to tune it to that and just feel, you know, not only the instrument but how it cuts across in the room, you know. So what I'm hearing here as a player is exactly what the person on the floor in the audience is hearing as well. You know, it's for some of us that decision, you know, is you know, like we pursue that. And so Hugh Masekela once remarked that if you can't play an instrument, if you can't write music, if you can't even hold a note, then you have no right to call yourself a musician.
Sure, yeah.
Which is a very triggering statement.
I could agree with that. If you're not musically inclined, you're not a musician.
Exactly. If you can sit behind a computer, and now there's AI, and you know, you loop samples which were composed by other musicians, and wham, you have a song.
You will have criticism of this from the new generation.
Yeah, I'm not saying it, I'm just quoting Hugh Masekela. So electronics certainly have you know, created various avenues, and which are impactful in a positive light, but also might impact negatively on in terms of creativity and originality.
Do you think so obviously drums are an obvious example, but piano, guitar. I mean,
you're learning how to play piano, by the way.
Poorly. I mean, I've always, as I said, I also grew up in a musical family. My father was a very accomplished jazz musician, played in a jazz band, taught classical guitar just in part-time, even though he was an English professor. So I picked up some, I tinkled, and then I rediscovered a passion, I think. It's not my passion like it's your passion, but it is something I love doing. Guitar I've always tingled along on. Again, I'm not accomplished in anything. I don't spend enough time doing it, but I enjoy it. And I think, so my question to you is, do you think that in authentic or acoustic autistic don't know where that came from, or acoustic guitars and drums and everything, it has a reverberation, it has a vibration that resonates quite literally with the human, I'm going to say soul, because I do think that's a thing. I think that's a part of it. Do you think that's a part of it?
I certainly think it is. And maybe that's why every single nation, tribe will have drums, for example. I mean, our very hearts have a very particular pulse. We all have a particular frequency as people. Our very planet has everything has frequency, really.
7.52 hertz, I think, is the Earth's resonation, something like that.
I sort of dabble in sound technical stuff as well, and one of the first things you listen out for in a room when you tune a PA system is how the sound behaves in that room, and so which areas are too reflective that you need to dampen, you know, put acoustic panels over there, and that's all just frequency. You know, where are all the lower frequencies reflecting? Where do I put those bass traps and all of that? That's just purely frequency, and managing those frequencies within a room. And with the moment people walk in, I mean, obviously, human beings, our flesh will absorb a lot of sound, but also just the fact that people themselves have a particular frequency to them. I don't know the science and the medicine and how that may shape a person, but I do know that music, particular sounds do
resonate.
Exactly. They affect how we feel. The moment you hear a particular chord, it's like, okay, well, that's sad, that's mellow, okay, that's upright, you know.
So true. I mean, and it is a very physical, tangible thing. A chord that's struck sends a sound wave, and then that hurts, that frequency passes through you, and you experience it. You and it triggers something. It triggers emotions. Clearly, it triggers the way the brain works. Yeah.
Which is why we tune drums, and rock, for example. It would be very difficult for me to imagine a rock drummer playing a highly tuned snare drum, that just cracks. Normally rock drummers will have a low to medium tuned snare, so it sounds heavy and it sounds full. It gives that extra punch and push. Whereas in jazz, we normally go for that high tuning, especially on the toms. So there's more tone and articulation. But you're also playing softly, but sometimes also playing very fast.
So, jazz-wise, I mean, the origins of jazz is quite associated with slavery.
Yeah.
Escape from that. So it's a liberation music.
Yeah.
You brought up rock. Rock is kind of, I guess, big from Elvis Presley, 50s. But then you have the 80s, kind of like the heavy metal. That's a further evolution in terms of the feelings of the people at the time. It would be interesting. We'd have to sit and kind of think about events of that period. 60s is a anti-war process. It kind of overlaps with early rock. Maybe it has its place in developing heavy metal. It's interesting. It definitely demarcates something in terms of frequency, in terms of how it affects the brain. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of science done on classical music in terms of helping the brain concentrate. Mozart is a particularly good one in terms of we're being distracted by our production manager again. Classical Mozart definitely strikes a frequency in the brain. It's very good for studying and working and focus, concentration. Okay. Is he telling us to wrap? Battery. What do we have left?
Red.
So we have that one. Okay. Well, I think we're good too.
Let's wrap it up.
It's such an interesting topic.
We'll do a part 2 perhaps, and maybe look at some specific case studies. I would love to look at the role of music in Nazi Germany. National anthems. National anthems would be very fascinating. Why Hitler had such a why nationalist regimes have this fond attraction to anthems.
It's fascism. It's uniting. But you're right. I mean, that whole. Maybe we can discuss the wave and how they kind of look at that marching, the drum. That kind of consistent. As you said, maybe the zombie song comes into that. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Maybe we'll do a part 2 of that at some point.
Part 2. Yeah.
Right. Are we ready? Are we good to go? We're gonna. Yes.
We're guillotining someone.
We're guillotining our production manager because of all of his faux pas. Right. For all the mistakes our production manager makes, including this one right now, I'm not recording. We are going to use the guillotine and have him decapitated.
Off with his head.
Nice.